My mother-in-law advised my husband to abandon me, asserting that I am unworthy of our family. I grinned and departed when she realized I possessed all she had plotted for. It was already too late. Following the time my mother-in-law sabotaged it, her son's life was adorned with pearls and accompanied with a glass of costly champagne on a warm Sunday afternoon as I was clearing the table during a family brunch. She leaned in, her voice a cultivated whisper laced with sweetness feigning worry. "Claire, let us not prolong this matter. I must abandon my son. I have frozen the silverware in my grasp." Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room felt denser as my husband, Daniel, laughed at something his father said, completely oblivious to the bombshell his mother had just revealed in our kitchen. She stated, "You've had your fun." She proceeded to adjust the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "But you must observe it, you are not the appropriate match for our family." It was insufficient. I had before encountered the subtle jabs directed at me, the upbringing, and the subtle jabs on my perceived lack of sophistication. As she consistently did, successfully introduced me as the spouse of Claire Daniel, failing to recognize me further. Nevertheless, today she was not concealing her identity. Concealed by meticulous phrasing, she was executing her strategy today. "You lack the authority," she persisted, "despite lacking a distinguished family name or significant ties. A lady like you merely hinders a man like Daniel." I sighed softly while arranging the dishes with precision. She misinterpreted my stillness as acquiescence. "Do not appear so astonished, sweetheart." She maintained a patronizing smile as her lips curled. "Daniel will remarry. We will identify someone more appropriate for him. One possessing the correct familial background and social class. Do you comprehend?" Ah, so that was the case. This was not merely an insult, but really. And Daniel's mother had issued an ultimatum. She anticipated my capitulation. To be humiliated, to gather my belongings, and depart discreetly while she selected a more suitable marriage for her esteemed son. She smiled, not as a defeated woman, but with a smile that should have empowered her. Uneasy, I comprehended fully. Hence, without uttering another word, I turned and departed, leaving her behind standing there, perplexed by my absence of resistance. She was entirely unaware the property she loved to show off, with its marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows, was not hers. Daniel is unaware that the prosperous enterprise she consistently disparaged, dismissing it as a minor endeavor, had outgrown Daniel's entire career, oblivious to the wealth she so casually relished. The opulent gifts were not derived from their family's affluence but from her belief that she had triumphed over the empire I had constructed from the ground up. Yet she remained oblivious to the reality. I had already lost that night. I did not inform Daniel about his mother's minor issue. I did not need to, as she was preoccupied with plotting my exclusion, unaware that she was standing in a house that was not hers. Specifically our mansion, the one she relished showcasing to her friends as what she perceived as Daniel's accomplishment, which was actually mine. I purchased it before our marriage, using my own funds, and registered in my name permitted Daniel to stage the performance to convince his mother that he had secured this existence for us. But, in reality, his wage scarcely paid the property taxes. It was entirely mine. And the instant she concluded that I was expendable, she had determined her own destiny. In the ensuing weeks, mother-in-law becomes more audacious, subtly suggesting to Daniel through her remarks, "Claire, cloaked in feigned concern, fails to comprehend our lifestyle. Darling, would you not find greater happiness with someone who genuinely compliments you?" Naturally, it's not her fault. She grew up in a specific way, in a different manner. Although let us remain pragmatic, I saw Daniel, unaware as he was. She consistently dismissed her remarks, oblivious to the turmoil simmering behind. Then arrived the ultimate provocation in the evening. I observed a muted chat between Daniel and his mother in the adjacent room. "She is not well. She urged you that you have provided her sufficiently. It is time to progress." At that moment, the decisive factor is if you will divorce her now. Indeed, she believed she had authority over me, which elicited a near laughter from me. She had none. The notion that evening as I reclined in bed next to my husband, the individual who had unwittingly as his mother declared war on our marriage, I came to a realization. I was irritated. I was not even astonished. The reality was they had already been defeated. They simply remained unaware. However, The initial fissure in Daniel's flawless existence occurred the following morning during breakfast. I sat opposite him, sipping my coffee. Observing as he effortlessly navigated through his phone with his characteristic distraction, he was oblivious to the events his mother had initiated the previous night. Unaware that the conflict had already begun. "You are unusually silent today," he reflected. Looking up from his screen, I grinned. Everything was fine since I had made my decision. I refused to beg, debate, or engage in conflict, allowing them to prevail or, at the very least, to believe they have triumphed, since what is there is greater satisfaction in vanquishing your adversary by allowing them to excavate their own demise. By mid-afternoon, I received the initial text came from my mother-in-law. "Daniel and I had a delightful experience during lunch today." He concurred that it is time to progress. She believed she was already in control. So I took a glass of wine. The message remained unanswered for some time. I desired her to feel assured, overconfident. 2 hours later, another message arrived. "I hope you understand, Claire. This is what is most advantageous for all parties involved." I found it amusing to assert that it is best for everyone. But not for Margaret. It was just advantageous for you, nevertheless. I fulfilled my role by responding to your message. She must have nearly dropped her champagne flute. I envisioned her reaction. Delight was likely informing her friends about how easily she had extricated me from her son's life. One can almost perceive her exultation. She accepted it remarkably well. Fully aware of her position, finally. "Daniel may be with someone deserving of our family." "Oh, Margaret." She was completely unaware that evening when Daniel returned home later than usual. He paused in the doorway, seemingly deliberating his remarks. He felt a wave of regret wash over him. "Hey, sweetheart. He has initiated contact. Can we converse, naturally?" I commented as I took a seat on the couch. He sat next to me, kneading his hands together. His quintessential nervous tic. "It was foreseeable. I believe we should part ways," he finally stated, as I inclined my head, feigning to contemplate his statements. "It is only that we desire disparate outcomes," articulated with the same formulaic phrases employed by every deceiver, fraud, and coward throughout history. I inquired, "Who's we?" merely for amusement. A fleeting expression of distress appeared on his face. He was unaccustomed to my tranquility. He likely anticipated tears, wrath, or some form of explosion. But all I did was smile. "If that is your desire, Daniel," I stated calmly. He blinked, pausing. "Wait, you are not disturbed?" I questioned why I felt this way while he examined my expression. Perplexed. This was not the response he anticipated. "I have been anticipating your arrival. You are unwilling to advocate for our marriage." Should I have inquired while standing? "It appears you have already reached a conclusion." Entered our bedroom, seized a bag, and positioned it on the bed. "I will afford you some space," I remarked. "I shall remain elsewhere for a moment." The expression on his face was invaluable. "Claire, wait. I do not refer to you. I must depart tonight. I merely intended to imply that I was already preparing." Allowing him to believe I was allowed him to believe I was devastated. Permitted him to assume he held the reins, unbeknownst to him. He was mistaken. I was departing, ensuring he remained in the precise position his mother desired, although it was free. Freedom was poised to cost him everything. I resided in opulence. The hotel that evening, the same one my mother-in-law had previously boasted about hosting charity parties. The irony was nearly poetic. I leisurely ordered champagne while seated by the window gazing at the metropolitan skyline, relishing the tranquility. Tomorrow Margaret would awaken upon believing she had triumphed. Daniel would assume he was progressing unencumbered by my presence, yet by the time they realized what they had genuinely lost, it would already be irrevocable. Margaret must have awakened feeling. I envisioned her triumphantly enjoying her morning coffee in the sunlit dining room. Reveling in the light of her victory. She had accomplished it. She had obliterated me. She had eliminated the lady she perceived as such in her perception, unworthy of her cherished boy. She had already commenced the next phase. She would seek a new bride for Daniel, one from an appropriate background whom she could shape and dominate. And regarding myself, I was meant to be a broken, terrible cautionary story of the consequences faced by women. They forgot their position. I grinned at the notion that she lacked any, unbeknownst to her, as she reveled in her triumph. Her world was on the brink of upheaval that morning. Daniel received his initial difficult instruction. I received a text from him, around 10 a.m. Claire. We need to discuss an issue with the house. Something is amiss. I did not receive a response before midday. My phone buzzed again. Why is the bank mentioning my name? The mortgage does not include it. Please get in touch. Ah, there it is. It had taken him less time. It took him more than 24 hours to comprehend what he had genuinely lost. But I was not finished. I let the messages accumulate, confusion evolving into annoyance, subsequently leading to panic. At 3 p.m. my attorney dispatched to me, "AHE acknowledged the truth. Inform me when you wish to proceed. Do not answer immediately. Let him ponder." It was not until the evening that Margaret became cognizant of the calamity. When I was in my hotel room relishing a tranquil dinner, the lawyer forwarded me another message. "Margaret just called. She is furious. She claims that an error has occurred." And I could almost hear her piercing voice asking, "What do you mean? My son's name? It is hardly complimentary." She must have asserted it was an oversight, a clerical blunder. After all, in her mind, everything that belonged to Daniel must be his. However, it did not. House, property, investments, or the business she had derided years ago. With another glass of wine, she would quickly realize that the true error had been underestimating me. By the time Daniel arrived, his mother demanded answers. I was prepared. I met them at the house that Margaret had once cherished family estate. Daniel awaited in the driveway. Arrived, and crossed alongside Margaret. Beside him, his meticulously groomed composure began to crack. "Claire," Daniel whispered, need to talk." Did I exit the vehicle with measured grace? "Slow," affirmed my ease. "Ties, NT." His mouth twitched sharply, indicating that there had been a problem. "The bank asserts that you are the registered owner of this house." I countered that this is not an error. Margaret blinked in stillness, as if attempting to grasp words she had never envisioned. Daniel expressed a sense of desperation, stating that the hearing was illogical. As I tilted my head, I perceived a subtle inflection in his speech, leading me to believe you had considered my request that you own this house, which we jointly owned, allowed the words to resonate within me. "Daniel, the mansion was never yours." Margaret's complexion paled. "No," she responded hastily. "No, that is not feasible. It is the truth. I completed it for her." And Daniel gazed at me. He shook his head. "However, we resided here together, and I permitted you," I stated plainly after a little stillness. Margaret reacted as she typically did when faced with adversity, furious. She exclaimed, her voice escalating, "This is absurd. You are insignificant without my son. You possessed nothing prior to his existence, whereas I had everything before him." I adjusted my tone to be calm and composed. Daniel inhaled sharply. Running a hand through his hair, I could observe understanding began to dawn that this situation was more significant than only the house. "Claire," Daniel remarked in a calmer tone, "let us discuss this matter. Perhaps we can reach an agreement." I grinned. "Oh, Daniel, I stated casually. "We have already accomplished that, hence. You signed a PRUP." Margaret gasped, and Daniel became still in an instant. I observed their universe collapse. I began to depart, but not before revealing a last truth. "You desired liberation from my presence," I said. "Congratulations. You obtained precisely what you desired." And with that, I departed, abandoning them on my property. Recognizing far too late that they had gambled and lost everything, Margaret stood frozen, her meticulously maintained world collapsing about her. Daniel was simultaneously engulfed in sheer bewilderment. His expression, his complexion was pallid, and his mouth was slightly ajar, as though he was grappling to comprehend the words I had just uttered. "Claire, we can resolve this," he eventually stated. I nearly chuckled and inquired, "Resolve what? Your mother's minor plot, your compliance with it, or your belief that you might just disengage? Preserve all that I have constructed." Margaret advanced, exuding fury from every pore. "You deceived me," she yelled at him, accusing him of manipulating her son into signing the prenuptial agreement. I tilted my head, allowing the weight of her words lingered in the air, and I echoed, "You mean the prenuptial agreement? That Daniel voluntarily signed the document that legally safeguards my business and assets?" Daniel opened his lips to begin, but I raised a hand to indicate silence. Tell me, Daniel. I inquired whether you actually read it or merely made assumptions like your mother. None of this would ever matter. The silence provided me with all the information I needed. Margaret's breath was rapid and sharp. She was not merely indignant but in a state of fear. She exclaimed, "This is incorrect. You are acting with malice and destroying this." "I am separating the family out of sheer pettiness," I stated, my voice smooth as silk. Margaret's expression darkened significantly, hue of crimson. "You were perpetually inadequate for this family." I stepped forward, facing her, looked directly, and calmly stated, "It's still. My name appears on the deed." The atmosphere between us crackled. For the first time in her life, Margaret was. She was aware of her powerlessness. As I began to depart, Daniel gently seized my wrist, however, in a state of desperation. "Claire," I hesitated, gazing down at his palm. For a year, previously, that touch might have held significance. But now it is only inconsequential, than the ultimate clutch of a drowning individual. "You should not go with this," he stated. "I too made an error. I let my mother influence my thoughts. But we can rectify this. I have studied the man I had once cherished. The man with whom I had constructed a life. However, that man no longer existed. Or perhaps he never did. One cannot engage in the game. The victim is now Daniel," I stated with a calm yet assertive tone. "Not after everything. No, after you selected her instead of me." Daniel swallowed hard. "I was a fool," he acknowledged. "Yes, I concurred that you were he." Margaret recoiled at my candor, emitting an outraged sound as if she were incredulous that I was addressing her. "I ignored her because you and your mother want my departure, as I stated, and I acquiesced." "He provided just what you requested," said Daniel. "Why are you not content?" He observed. His features revealed a sense of humiliation. I did not require his response, as I already understood. Margaret asserted. "I knew it," I responded. "It is over. You simply refused to realize that this mansion was intended for Daniel." She wept, however. "I was never corrected, nor was anything else pertaining to you." Margaret, now trembling, had spent years believing she was entitled, untouchable. She could manage and control people in her vicinity. Yet she stood there in the driveway of the house that was not hers. She ultimately comprehended that she had lost it. And more regrettably, she had never possessed control from the outset. I did not remain to witness Margaret's final, futile efforts to save her dignity. As I approached my car, I experienced a sensation I had not felt in months. Relief. I was not merely departing from Daniel, I was also departing from Margaret. It was liberating to escape the constant belittlement, manipulation, and struggle to prove my worth to people who never deserved me. The repercussions of Daniel's decisions ensnared him. While Margaret remained powerless, she attempted to usurp the empire while I was merely beginning. Margaret was not the kind who acquiesces to loss silently. 2 days after I departed from her and Daniel, I received a message. "Not Daniel. You may own the mansion, but do not delude yourself into believing you have triumphed. My son will recuperate and will someone more suitable. Someone who truly fits in this family. Relish your solitude." I grinned while reading Little Empire, as it endures. Oh, Margaret, by adhering to the delusion of control, she continued to assume that Daniel had something to recuperate from. I believed I had lost her. She was on the verge of discovering the truth through difficult means, which I disregarded. Margaret's remark prompted no obligation for a response, however. Life often unfolds in unexpected manners, providing karma independently. A week later, a common acquaintance, one of the few who remaining impartial during the ordeal, I reached out. "You will not believe what is transpiring." I sipped my coffee, amused. As Daniel lost his composure, the job that piqued my interest was how Margaret proceeded. She advocated for his promotion to her superior, asserting that he merited it. Thereafter I nearly choked on my drink. Naturally, she did. Margaret was not merely, she was domineering and delusional. Having spent years believing that Daniel was inherently entitled to success just based on his name, it should hold significance. However, the business realm fails to provide recompense. What actions did his boss take regarding his arrogance? I inquired. And not only was he not promoted, but human resources also intervened, commenced an examination of his performance. It appears he was already undergoing a review for inadequate performance alongside Margaret. He was abruptly dismissed after storming into the workplace and creating a disturbance. I breathed slowly. Daniel had lost his residence, his sense of security, and now his employment, not due to my actions, but rather hers. Margaret had devoted years to shielding Daniel from repercussions and fabricating justifications. Margaret had worked tirelessly to ameliorate each failure. But now she had completely destroyed him. I had not yet completed seeing it all disintegrate when the subsequent call arrived. 2 days later I received a call from Daniel, which I allowed to ring without answering, as I was not interested. Subsequently, a text message arrived. Claire, may we converse? I contemplated my choices as I gazed at the message. I owed him nothing, neither my time nor my pity, yet curiosity prevailed. I responded to Daniel, who exhaled in relief as his voice cracked. I own my mistakes, nonetheless. I am uncertain about my next steps. I reclined, allowing the distance between us. What do you want me to say, Daniel? I inquired. He confessed. I did not anticipate this occurrence. And he paused before adding, I believed you hesitated. I believed your mother was correct. A little gap followed. Daniel was acknowledging the truth for the first time. In a whisper, he prioritized his mother's opinions above everything else, above logic, truth, and even me. And where had it led him? He stated feebly. I did not intend to harm you. Yet you did. Another stillness ensued. He inquired whether we might meet. I closed my eyes. It was the final, desperate endeavor to retrieve me. Yet he desired not my presence. He sought stability in the life he envisioned, discarded, and I was not engaged in the endeavor of rescuing men from their own arrogance. Daniel, I stated that we had exhausted all topics of discussion. It was the first time I detected genuine worry in his voice. Claire. Wait. Goodbye, Daniel. I hung up. I believed that would conclude the matter, but Margaret was not finished humiliating herself yet. 2 days later she arrived at my office. Storming past my receptionist, she intruded into my private office as if she retained control over my existence, exclaiming, "This is your fault." While forcefully striking her hands, I remained sitting and composed at my workstation, unperturbed. I inquired calmly, "What precisely is my transgression?" "You have devastated my son's life. He lost everything, the house, the security." "No, Margaret," I interjected. "She did not retain anything. Daniel relinquished everything." She blinked and said, "Excuse me." I leaned forward. "Even Daniel opted to heed your voice. I opted to accept my disposability. He decided to depart. And I allowed the words to resonate, however. Inform me, Margaret," I persisted, "when you instructed him to abandon me, when you assured him of something superior. Did you ever consider the possibility that you might be mistaken?" She became pale. "I know," I replied softly. "You did not cut her off." I stood up slowly. "And now you must endure it." Margaret opened her mouth, although no words emerged, as internally she recognized the truth. I had never been the issue. She was the one who had constructed Daniel. She had nurtured a man who could not stand alone, instilling in him the belief that entitlement equated to strength, ultimately leading to his downfall. Her own arrogance had contributed to his destruction. Margaret stumbled backward, appearing significantly diminished. "Margaret, please exit my office," I stated quietly. She hesitated one final time, moment of defiance, nevertheless. Ultimately, she had no remaining power, and she departed. The door clicked shut behind her, and I exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The storm had passed. On that day, Daniel also remained silent. The silence was profound, although it was the most favorable type of silence. The type that denoted freedom, no further meddling, no longer second-guessing myself. I refused to struggle for acceptance in a family that never valued me. I have triumphed. But there is more. Significantly, I had matured. The first morning I genuinely felt liberated. I awoke to the sound of silence, no tension in the atmosphere. No coerced dialogues, no passive-aggressive messages, only tranquility. Yet the world continued advancing my enterprise, enhancing my crew, and bolstering my confidence. Unyielding, isn't it? Margaret had devoted years to persuading me that I seemed apparent that, without Daniel, I would disintegrate. My success appeared to be intrinsically linked to him. And now, while she and her son hurried to collect the remnants of their disarray while I was preoccupied with constructing something more significant, months elapsed. The murmurs of Daniel's decline persisted, He endeavored to reconstruct his life and demonstrate his capacity for resurgence. He suffered without my presence despite being above the circumstance. The job market was indifferent to his status as Margaret's son. The women he sought were uninterested in a man who had experienced loss. Her meddlesome reputation had become pervasive, affecting everyone around her. A former co-worker visited her one day, seeking association. My boutique. You avoided a predicament. She informed me that Daniel is, to put it mildly, not favorable. I am doing well. I did not want specifics as I was already informed he had been provided with everything. Yet he squandered it all. In contrast, I had, despite having built everything. I had not yet reached completion. To mark the 1-year anniversary of my new life, I hosted a modest event at my residence. Flagship boutique will neither celebrate revenge nor gloat, but rather acknowledge the extent of my progress. I had invested several years demonstrating my worth to others who never genuinely appreciated it. I am now appreciating myself. No longer will I diminish myself or await validation. No longer will I contend for affection that was never genuine. I stood in my boutique, encircled by resilient, autonomous women who provided support and comprehension. The moment I genuinely felt at home was when I encountered her, Melissa, the young woman whom Margaret had previously presented as a superior choice for Daniel. Lingered near the entryway, hesitant and nearly ashamed. I raised an eyebrow, but before I could articulate a response, she spoke first. I owe you an apology, she murmured softly. I leaned against the counter. I waited, believing her admission that you were the one. The issue of your disposability caused her to avert her gaze. I witnessed her actions towards Daniel and recognized that I could have been in his position. I permitted Margaret desired my departure, believing I was inferior, and now the same ladies she deemed superior. It would be preferable to acknowledge the truth. You are fortunate that I ultimately expressed this to you. She exited before it was too late, exhaling and nodding. I heard about your triumph. I expressed my want to witness it firsthand, gesturing towards my boutique. My empire, legacy, I remarked with a sneer. Welcome to the little shop. Margaret attempted to chuckled, shaking her head, acknowledging that she had underestimated you. She expressed this sentiment frequently. A multitude of individuals concurred as the evening concluded, and I exited, gazing at the city skyline. The identical skyline I had observed on the night Daniel departed, during which I had been preparing for. I had already triumphed in the war, not due to vengeance, nor because I observed their suffering, but since I had reclaimed my life. Margaret had desired it. Margaret erased me. Instead, I blossomed. Daniel believed he was progressing, but I had ascended. The most significant aspect was that I had not undertaken it for them, but rather for myself. As Margaret once conveyed to me, I was inadequate for the family. And ultimately, she was correct. I was not good enough, sufficient for them. I surpassed them.